Oh, yes. This is the Hardcore Marketing Show. I'm Casey Cheshire, your host for this epic journey. And today's show, sponsored by Cheshire Impact, on a mission to help people maximize their use of Pardot and Salesforce. CheshireImpact.com. Bam. All right, there it is. We are recording, and I am excited for this one. Honored, privileged to be able to speak to this particular person. Our teams have worked together in the past, but this is the first time I've had a chance to really learn from this person. Who is he, Casey? Stop leading us on. Who is this marketing leader, thought leader? And particular story he's been through where he started a company where there was no marketing, and now it is a publicly traded company with multiple products across multiple geographies. What is that adventure like? We're going to get into that. Has his PhD, former professor, a student at heart, published numerous articles, white papers. Again, quite the thought leader. An honor to have him here. Chief Marketing Officer at nCino, Jonathan Rowe. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Casey. Thrilled to be here. And that's quite an introduction. I was excited to hear from whoever was going to be speaking.
Yeah, I know. You're like, wait, geez, that's me. Oh man, I'm excited you're here, and even just on the prep we've done beforehand, it just was exciting to hear about the different facets of. I can't wait to get into it. So I'm gonna pass you this thing. It's heavy, but I know you got that beach workout going. So here we go. Ugh. Okay, so here you go. Thor's hammer. You got it. Okay,
got it.
Yeah, that was quick. That was good. You were like, give me that hammer.
I'm ready to go, Casey. I mean, marketing.
Take Thor's hammer.
Passionate. Yep.
Yeah. Take Thor's hammer, smash for me some kind of myth, bogus strategy, misconception. Set the record straight once and for all.
No, I think a big fan of the show and thrilled to be here. I think, to me, as I think about different myths, right, and I know you've got a great following and audience, right, predominantly marketing folks. And one of the things that when I got to nCino, I was sort of the 10th employee, right, and we were just getting the company started. And one of the things as I stepped into marketing with kind of almost a blank canvas, right, which is a both overwhelming but exciting moment. I remember kind of thinking about, okay, what to be building a marketing organization, a brand, and a company, what are the things that are important? I thought back to a lot of what I've read and researched over the years around marketing. And I'm always struck by, if we go way back to the financial crisis or situations sometimes where companies either struggle or when revenue kind of maybe slows down a little bit, I was always sort of taken by the fact that often one of the first things that gets cut in those organizations is marketing. And that, I'm sure to your audience and me, that drives me crazy, right? And why is that? And to your point about the myth and the hammer, I would like to hammer that and slam that down, because to me, that means that organization doesn't see any value in marketing. And that's a shame, because the purpose of marketing is to help grow and drive revenue. And I always like to think of a very basic, simple formula. I'm a simple guy. I can, complex things overwhelm me. And so I like to think of things in very simple ways. And so, for example, if I sort of either reached into your pocket here or asked you to give me $20, and you gave me that $20, and I took that and I looked at all the different marketing channels we had, I thought about our different messaging, and I invested that where I think there'd be a lot of value in reaching our target audience. And then I tracked and measured that, and I could come back to you and say, Casey, that $20 I pulled out of your pocket when you weren't looking, I'm now going to give you $100. And you might say, hey, I'm going to take 50 of that and give you 50, and let's go do more of that.
Do more of that, yeah.
Or take 100 and let's do even more, right? But to me, that's the basic premise of marketing. And so I really, of the different things that I anchor around and really drive me, and I'd like to bust with that Thor's hammer, is this idea that obviously when companies grow, I think marketing needs to make sure they are part of driving that growth. But secondarily, if you're part of a company or you join a company where things maybe aren't going the way you want it to, you should be investing in marketing, but you should do it in a way that you can illustrate and showcase the value.
Right. And, this is a really interesting take on this, because I know we've definitely had marketing therapy on the show where people are like, man, kind of, and I'm with them. I'm wearing with like, oh, they're letting go of marketing, especially when COVID was really hitting strong at the beginning. But it's not like we can always blame everyone else for the fact that they did that. What you've brought up here is the organization doesn't see the value. If they don't see the value, you can't blame them at all for it, right? And so there's some kind of responsibility on us as marketers. And you mentioned the 20 and 100. That's a no brainer. You give me 100 back, I'm taking a mortgage out and I'm going to give you as much as I can. I want that multiple. Let's go. So what kind of responsibility is there on the marketing side to make sure the organization sees the value, and then how?
Yeah, great question, Casey. And I want to get your thoughts on this as well, but I would say it's all on the marketing organization, right? To
Okay.
your point, there's always going to be challenges and things from whether it's a budgetary perspective or because there's many other functions at most organizations, right, who are also asking and trying to invest money for what they think is appropriate. And so what's important from a marketing perspective is first knowing it is your responsibility to show value. And so from day one, you need to start not only putting in place from a marketing perspective, what I'll call, I don't want to call it necessarily infrastructure, but two things, the systems to be able to track and measure, right? Because marketing can be a tricky and difficult thing. And you mentioned some of the work that we've done together in the past, right? We use marketing automation systems. We use Salesforce CRM and part out for marketing automation. We use Google Analytics, right? There's so much today that gives us a lot of data. It can be
Yeah.
overwhelming because it's all kind of sometimes in different places. But first and foremost, you need to make sure before you're doing or while you're doing marketing activities, you need to ask yourself the question, how am I going to measure the success and the value and impact of this? Because when you go to ask for money for a marketing budget, whether it's for the fiscal year ahead or for a specific project, if you don't have a way of saying, I'm going to need X dollars, and this is the value I think we can drive, and here's how I'm going to measure it, and I'm going to come back and give you updates. And so, when I think about all of our marketing activities at nCino, from day one, I have very much put in place and worked, and we have an incredible team. We actually have now over almost 80 people on the marketing team at nCino, which is extraordinary,
Really?
incredible. Yeah, it's a really
You got a
phenomenal team.
company in the marketing team.
It's really it's truly a privilege to be part of this team. And we've always done two things. We always have a saying, which is we invest wisely, right? And in which case we treat the company's dollars just like we would in our personal lives. And from that standpoint, we want to know how much we need, what are we investing it in, what do we think it's going to return, and how are we going to measure that? And if you create that mindset within your own department, if you then make sure you have ways of tracking that through dashboards and reports and message that back up to the organization, whether it's the executive team, whether it's the board of directors, whether it's other parts of the organization, I spend a lot of time in my role going to different parts of the company and just giving them updates on how marketing is doing. Because, unfortunately, there's so much information in all of our lives, personal and professional these days, and you want to keep top of mind, even with colleagues, right, outside of marketing and how you're doing.
Yeah.
And then I always make sure we celebrate how things are going. And by the way, not everything works, right? And it's very important sometimes to also admit when things work, because the worst thing you want to do is sweep it under the rug and pretend it didn't happen, because not everything works. And sometimes you have an opportunity to take multiple bets, and if one or two doesn't work, it's okay. And in other cases, if it doesn't work, that's a challenge. And that, those things happen. It just puts more emphasis on making sure you take a calculated investment. But yeah, it's a long answer to your question, which is one, understanding how much you need, because you never want to go and ask for money and then realize you didn't ask for enough. Two, from right away, have a case and an ROI message on how much value that's going to drive and how you're going to showcase that value. So what the organization cares about. Three, make sure you track and have a way of measuring how things are going, and then make sure you celebrate that and communicate those throughout the organization. So, yeah, I don't. What are your thoughts? I mean, you work in this stuff day in and day out, right? You
Yeah.
help put our system in place. What do you see around this as well?
Yeah, no, I love that list you have. It simplifies it so much. And I think there's some kind of mental hurdle we have in marketing where we think what you just described. I mean, there is work, right? There is work involved. You do need to get systems, you do need to implement them and actually use them, but it's so important. And I think what I see a lot from my end is a lot of distraction, right? Something about marketing, we're like cats with lasers or catnip, and we're just like, or both, and we're just running around and we're having a great time, but be, we kind of we do these sort of fun texts that maybe aren't answering that question of how much and what's the ROI. We
Yep.
don't answer that. We don't get the systems in place. We don't do the $20, $100 exchange. We kind of like, well, we spent that 20. I spent your 20, Casey, on this other thing. And it's really neat and you're like, oh, okay, but do I get my $20 back, or like what do
Right.
I? It's unclear what I get back from it. So I just see a lot of distraction from people. How do you keep from getting distracted? Is that question first and foremost? It sounds like you're almost like an investment firm.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And part of it is you also have to get good at saying no.
Uh,
And I would say one of the things that we've done a nice job of at nCino as a marketing department is I remember early on when nCino first got started. So I've been in situations where we've had very little money, right, to invest in marketing. And I had to think to myself, okay, with this very small budget in a company that nobody had ever heard of, right, that's just getting started, what is most important, and things obviously such as your website, right? And we invested in PR, and so we made some very calculated, very narrow focused decisions. And I remember a lot of employees and people coming to me and saying, hey, we want to get a booth at a conference, or we need a bunch of swag to use here or there. And I said no. And I remember
mm.
at the time, nobody was thrilled to hear that because everyone has different ideas, right? And every
Yeah.
business and industry and target market's different. But in my mind, those things would not have been great investments compared to what I thought were good investments from a website and PR perspective to get us started. And so I said no. And ironically, what's happened over time is I've kind of developed a little bit, I don't want to say necessarily a reputation, but people generally know that I am, it's hard to get things by me in terms of how we spend marketing dollars, especially ideas outside the marketing department, which, is great. You always want to welcome ideas, and some are good and maybe some don't always make sense. But the nice thing is, because I kind of have this mentality, people are always saying, you should spend more, or are you investing enough? Because we've developed an image that is, we invest very wisely and we show people how we do that. And what happens is, especially when you see the success and impact of that, is people think it's valuable. And the opposite of our scenario, the myth we busted, which is when you bust that myth and you see all this, is you want to see more investment in marketing. That's a wonderful place to be.
I love the internal brand you've created. Like all these conversations, we talk about all these different factors, but you've created a reputation. Hey, we're marketing, right? So creating that image internally, though, and being mindful that that matters too. And you've created this image but also because it's true, is that we're not careless with money. And I think that's the opposite. We were just talking about when you get
Yep.
distracted. Yeah, you're being careless, but you're also creating an image internally that you guys are a cost center. You guys are just spending money, and you're like the make it pretty people. And it's like, no.
Right.
And so it sounds like some calculated no's got you that reputation. And not that you're a no man, because clearly this company's gone to stratospheric proportions, but you were wise about it. And I think a lot of us could be served well by trying to create that image internally by being much more pointed in terms of what we do.
Yeah, I think that's right, Casey. And I think the other thing too that's important as we kind of think about myths, and you actually, I would almost take what you just said and take that the hammer again,
Yep.
which
Yep. You got
is
it. Still yours.
that sometimes organizations look at marketing as just to make things pretty, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's another responsibility. It's kind of tied to this idea of showing the value of what marketing represents, is that marketing should be a strategic part of the organization. It is not just a make things pretty. And again, that's easy for me to say, right? It depends on obviously the leadership you work with, your background, the size of the organization, all those variables. So it's these things are always easier said than done. But to me, part of what's tied to that really proving out the ROI and the value of marketing is also illustrating that marketing is a lot more than just make us look pretty. It is a strategic part of the organization. And I think one way to kind of think about that, or at least I message that, is, if you think about different companies, right? Oftentimes you're broken into sales and, you may, if you have a product or a service function, right? And each of those areas are focused on what they think they need to do, which is either sell more customers, right? Sell more product or sell
Mhm.
more services, or deliver those services, right? And all those people have that very specific mindset. What makes marketing to me unique is you sort of represent all of those stakeholders, not only within the company, but outside the company as well. And so that gives you a very broad view on what often is best for the company versus just one of those groups. And I always like to say at nCino that marketing is Switzerland, right? We're neutral in all the different stakeholders. I mean, obviously customers are critically important as our partners, employees, but we are able to look at all the different motivations of each and also have an opinion and input and point of view on what we think is best for the organization and all the stakeholders.
It's such a It's cool, right? Like it's probably why we love marketing and we kind of gravitate toward it. Is that broad view? We get to dance in all the different. I mean, we're all the different clubs or all the different plays, whatever the metaphor is. We get to go across all the things, and I think other than finance, who tends to pay everyone or whatnot, or is thinking about it holistically as well, no one else is really thinking about it. They're all very much, yeah, not that they don't think about other departments, but they're usually pretty focused. They're usually compensated very narrowly on what they need to do, and that might be okay. But the idea of having some group that looks at the overall process, so it's not some disjointed thing. It's magic.
Yep, agreed.
What's your approach? Because I know we kind of talked about the internal brand of marketing and making sure that people understand, hey, that we're serious about investing everything, holding ourselves accountable. But brand itself, how do you approach brand? I mean, we do make things pretty, but we also are an investment in growth of the. So how do you rationalize brand? How do you approach brand?
Yeah, another great question, Casey. And this would probably be, I think we're on, maybe the second myth here. I think that first one being that simplified marketing formula for success,
Yeah.
right? And then also I'd give us a 0.5 myth there for that marketing should be looked at strategically, right,
Agree.
within the organization, just not a make it pretty. And I think that maybe that next myth that we can bust, and maybe it's a self-created myth a little bit on my part, but is that marketing owns the brand.
Okay.
I like to say that marketing is the steward of the brand, but that, your brand is ultimately owned by your company, all the employees, your customers, your partners, your community. And so when you think about, or when I think about, or nCino thinks about our brand in that way, what you realize is, you need to make sure all those different stakeholders, if you will, understand what your brand means. What does it stand for? And you also need to understand the flip side is correct as well, that all those different groups can help shape your brand, day by day, year by year, over time, good and bad. And
Okay.
so I think, for us at nCino, and some of this, you hear it all the time. And, I don't, again, these things, whether it's mission statements, vision statements, right? They all have value, but they
Yeah.
only have value if they're authentic, true, and you build meaning behind them. And so, again, if I go back to the very early days of nCino, so as I mentioned, when I got to nCino, there was 10 of us, right? And we're now over
And you were
1,000.
you were it for marketing, right? Like you're
Yeah,
the
yeah.
guy. Yeah.
I walked in, and our incredible CEO, who's one of the founders, Pierre Nadet, basically pointed to we were all sat around a table, pointed to an empty chair at the table and said, "We don't have anyone doing marketing and we need it. So go do marketing." And, that was kind of how I got started. And yes, and, from there. So one of the first things I did as we thought about our brand is, and I think a lot of us at nCino, our goal was really with the software we were building, to really have a meaningful impact on the banking and financial services industry from a technology and digital perspective. And in my mind, the fact that we're based in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is a wonderful place to live, our target market is all over the country, all over the US. Now it's, well beyond that in Europe and Australia and Japan.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was very much sort of community banks throughout the US. And to me, I wanted us to portray an image of a much larger organization than we were. And so one of the first things I did after we kind of created the name of the company and the logo is I put a sign up on the wall that said, "Everything we do represents $1 billion brand." And the reason I did that is because I wanted us, not only from a marketing perspective, but as a company perspective, even though there was 12 of us, and if you visit us in Wilmington, North Carolina at that time, sitting around a table, right, in a corner of an existing office building, you would have thought to yourself, this isn't $1 billion brand. This is,
Was it even a nice table,
yeah.
or was it like
No, it was literally a table. It was a table. Yeah, it was a table you probably buy at Target or
yeah.
somewhere with 4 legs, and it's just big enough to fit 10 people around. Yeah, that $100 that we made earlier, that would have gone a long way for us
Yeah.
back
New
then.
table.
But I created that sign and I put it on the wall because I wanted everyone to be thinking about this company and the image we portrayed as a much larger organization, much larger brand. And so whether it was the website we created, whether it was, when we walked into client meetings, whether it's all the emails we sent, right? Like every interaction, no matter whether you're marketing or not, to me, if you have that mindset of what you want to be, it doesn't mean you have to be $1 billion brand. You want to be, the best service provider in your community, whatever it is, have in your mind a bit of a representation of what you want the brand to be. And then what will happen is people's actions and behaviors will start following that, right? And if you have that in line with the mission and vision of what you want to be as an organization, no matter how big or small you may be, you start building what your brand means, and you start educating your customers and your partners. And if what you're saying you're doing and what you're saying you are equals what you actually deliver from a product and service perspective, then it starts building momentum. And to me, that's where you get to the fact that, again, marketing can help define the brand, but you ultimately don't own the brand. You become the stewards of the brand. And if you do it right, it just, everyone else becomes brand cheerleaders for you to help define it. And again, I mean, nCino has been an incredible story, but the thing I'm incredibly proud of now is, it was amazing to me when we went to Europe about 3 years ago. We opened an office in London, and you think, hey, we have, at the time, I don't remember exactly how many customers we had, but we had a number of banks in the US, and to think to yourself, okay, we're going to London, to Europe. Nobody's probably heard of nCino, but what was amazing to me is when we got there and started talking to some banks, they had heard of us. Now, not everyone had heard of us. They maybe didn't have a lot of information on us, but the fact that we had built a bit of a reputation already, it's amazing how in this day and age, information travels, good and bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Good and bad. Yeah. Yeah. It's a fresh take on brand. And I mean, we've said do own the investment of the dollars in, dollars out, the ROI. Know what you can own, right? It's like almost like those ancient prayers. Know what you can control and what you can't control. Know what you can control. Those money things coming in, you need to make sure you're responsible for that. But when it comes to the brand, I like how you're calling it a steward. It's like, I'm not hurting cats, but it's something like all these different pieces are all moving independently. You can't control them all,
Yep.
but you can influence them.
Yep.
Again, back to marketing, we're marketing are internally as well as externally. And I love that you're sort of pointing the baseball bat to the stadium saying, this is where we're going, $1 billion.
Yep.
We'll all have our own tables one day. Right now we're sharing.
And by the way, since as we've grown, we moved that goalpost, so that $1 billion became a $10 billion brand.
Wow.
Because you want to keep, again, whenever you start getting close to it, and we have a ways to go, is you move it out, right? Because you want us thinking even bigger now. I mean, back then we were thinking, let's have a huge impact in the US, but now we're thinking, let's continue to have that global presence, which is exciting.
Yeah, man, that is exciting. You keep moving that target and places and places and places. A steward of the brand, doesn't own it. What does it stand for? Man, and then aligning it with the mission and the values. What, just real quick, kind of want to bring it to earth just for a moment. What are some of the practical ways that you can steward a brand?
Great question. So to me, first is defining what your brand, what you want it to represent, right? Okay. So I came back to the mission and vision, right? And you hear those things a lot. And again, I think those things are only as valuable as the time you put into them, and if you truly believe in them and follow them. And so for nCino, from day one, our vision has always been to be the worldwide leader in cloud banking. So we were, one of the pioneers in cloud banking software. And so that has always been top of mind in terms of what, again, this idea of building a bigger brand and looking bigger than we were as we grew. And then secondly, our mission has always been to transform financial services through innovation, reputation, and speed. And we've always anchored a lot in those things. And so again, I think to go back to some of those practical things, have a mission and vision, and don't just make it a document that you write it down and you stick it in the corner. Put thought into it, have meaning in it, and then also turn it into your marketing activities, right? Talk about how you innovate as a company in your sector. So for nCino, like we truly innovate in the technology and financial services, and challenge ourselves each and every year to do that, right? So we focus on innovation, reputation. We very much focus on, we want our clients to respect us, right? It's the old adage, which is, sales, you never want to go in and just necessarily be friends with somebody, right? Yes, you want to develop a great relationship,
but
you
friend
want
zone.
right. You want them to respect you, because sometimes I think good, respectful relationships is sometimes you challenge things. And For us, it's to go into a bank, and if a bank can operate more effectively or efficiently, work with them to try and help them figure that out. And sometimes that means having difficult conversations. But if it's the right thing for the bank, and we think and they also agree it's going to make them better and help them serve their customers, those are good conversations. And so you want to have that reputation and that speed as well. I mean, this pace at which things move nowadays. So I'm sort of defining a little bit our mission, but my point with that is, you hear me talking about it, everyone at the company where I work at nCino can also talk about that. And
Wow.
when we talk about our clients, right? And so then again, it becomes part of your basic premise and the ethos of your company. And then the other thing I would add too, and this maybe ties into, if you know, we're going to have time for a third myth, and that's the importance of cultural branding. Because I think
Mm.
a lot of marketers, we focus very much just on the company and the product and the service brand, and we don't focus on the culture brand. And I think that culture brand is becoming more and more important. And so again, I'm probably spending a little too long answering what was a really good question, but to me, first,
Mm.
spend time in that mission and vision, define it, make sure it has meaning, and then actually use it to incorporate into your marketing and your brand building. Make sure it reflects on your website, all of those different places, right? It's almost like you're just reinforcing. You know, there's that thing in marketing, or the adage, which is tell somebody something, tell them again, then tell them again. We'll tell them 5 more times, right? And do it over year after year, month after month, day after day. And so it's just that repetition. We have a saying at nCino in our marketing department, which is steady drumbeat, right? I want to have the steady nCino, steady drumbeat of marketing activity and consistent messaging. So I think that's too. And then that additional point is that cultural brand. I think more and more there's a marketing opportunity, again, as we think about takeaways for the audience from this, to really brand, or let me rephrase that, to include in your brand your culture, as long as, assuming it's something you're proud of and think has, you know, value. If it's not something, then that's a different conversation, probably a different podcast. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity for a cultural brand in this as well.
Yeah, no, I want to dive into the culture just real quick. One thing that was popping out to me from what you're saying around just branding itself is that you're defining it, and the value you get from it is in direct proportion to how much time you spend thinking about it, developing it, communicating it. And that's huge. Just a very simple concept, but if you don't spend any time on it, then yes, you're right. It's not going to really do anything for you. It's going to be weak and it's going to fall flat. But if you've really considered it, it's smart, it addresses the mission, addresses all these things, it can be really powerful. It can be a powerful drumbeat. And I love that phrase too. I kind of want to be like a fly on the wall in this office and see like all these cool, concepts and strategies and slogans on the walls, that internal branding, but also the take action part. That really stuck out to me, that a lot of times people come up and they'll ask, hey, should I do this tool, or should I do this strategy or this approach? And ideally, I'd love to point them back to their own brand. And I would say, well, what does your brand say? Are you this aggressive? Are you going to cold call your competitors' customers or not? Your brand should ideally
Yep.
give you a very clear picture, suggestion of like, yeah, we're aggressive, we're going after it. Or, no, we're this approach, ideally that answers something. So it's not just a slogan on a wall, but it actually, you can take action off of, and you even said that, take action off of what you've written. It should be able to guide you in the right direction.
Spot on. Yep.
Yeah. Tell me about this cultural side though, because this is interesting. Again, it's the external and the internal, the marketing side. What role do we play, and how much do we own it? We're shepherds of the brand. We own that return on investment for the spend. What is our part that we play on the cultural side?
Yeah, I think this would probably be the third myth, and this is an interesting one. This is one I think, again, we probably won't have enough time to explore, but I think is an area that I would like to see more marketing organizations both take ownership of, in terms of putting out what their cultural brand is, but secondly, having either more involvement or more ownership in the recruiting and culture process within companies. Because traditionally, recruiting, that process, the hiring process, is traditionally in HR. And again,
Right.
that's not to say that's not the wrong place. Every HR department's different. There's phenomenal HR professionals out there. But for us, we really want HR to be able to be freed and focused on our employees, right? In terms of making sure they have great benefits, right? Making sure we get paid every month and have the right systems. And most importantly, making sure they're there to support employees through a lot of things. Obviously, with the pandemic, I mean,
Oh
HR
yeah.
has never been more important, right? And that's really critical. But at the same time, recruiting and hiring and culture is actually a sales and marketing activity. And so at nCino, our recruiting organization is actually part of marketing, which is
Wow.
very unusual. But I think it's worked incredibly well, and I truly think it's something that I again hope over time to share more and more about, because I think it is a shift in how organizations think and what can be more successful. And I say that for a few reasons. One, if you think about recruiting, right? Every organization, every industry is in a, trying to get great talent is hard, right? I'm sure, you talk to tons of folks. I mean, you've got a great organization. Finding great people is hard. And
Oh yeah.
oftentimes great people have lots of options, and retaining great people can be a challenge.
Yeah.
And so to do that, you want to create, what is your cultural brand? What does your company represent from a cultural perspective? And, if you go to the nCino website, we actually have a section of our website that's called culture, and it's about our company. Because if you're going to make a decision to work for a company, that, I mean, in many ways, that's the equivalent of almost, getting married, right? That's a big, big decision.
Right.
And
Wow.
do you want to go through that experience without having had 3 or 4 dates, right? Of seeing that person after a long drive or a flat tire, all those situations. And so for us, we feel very strongly in our culture. I think, we have a phenomenal culture. And so we want to share that culture. We want to tell that authentic story and let our employees do it for us. Because the thing I think a lot of marketers maybe are starting to appreciate is that if you don't grab your cultural brand, start telling the story about it, it's already happening. There's places like Comparably and Glassdoor where good
Yeah.
and bad things are getting out there. And if you
Totally.
don't get some control of that or help define what your culture means, it's being defined for you,
Yeah.
which is not always a good thing. So, and again, as you think about recruiting, every experience a candidate has with your organization, whether you hire them or not, is again back to that brand building. And so we have at nCino, we just really call it that, that special glove service. Every candidate, every interaction, every conversation is really important. And one of the things I'm very proud of is, on our Glassdoor profile, we have phenomenal reviews, which I'm very proud of. But one of the things I'm most proud of is we actually have reviews from candidates who we have not hired. So imagine having a candidate who's gone through the interview process, was not hired for whatever the reason may be, but left a great review on their experience. They may recommend a friend. They may apply again in a year or two if there is more experience in it, whatever it may be. But that helps continue lifting up our brand. And so it's a long way of saying that I think as a marketer, grabbing that cultural brand is a tremendous opportunity in terms of defining it, sharing your authentic culture. And then secondly, making sure you have a very tight relationship with HR, and even challenging your organization to say, why aren't some of these functions maybe a part of marketing? Because again, to elevate marketing to a more strategic thing. And maybe the last thing, and I'll pause to get your thoughts, is, how to turn this into action. And one of the things I always like to talk about, we talked a little bit about this during the prep session, is, I asked you if you had any portraits of your kids right at home. You may have them right in front of you on your desk.
I do.
And
Yeah.
when you bought that frame, it came with that generic picture of the perfect family right in
Right.
it. And that frame that's now in front of you on your desk there on the wall, it doesn't have that generic family picture. It has your picture on it. And I use that example because I'm always astounded that, and again, there are always situations sometimes where stock images or stock footage is needed. But if you've got your website and it's full of stock images that you went out and bought, what does that tell your employees? To me, that's the equivalent of buying that framed generic photo and putting it up. And it doesn't represent your family. I mean, how would your family feel every time they walk by your desk or your office and they saw a picture of some generic family? And so to me, those are little simple things that go a long way. And again, it may mean the pictures aren't perfect or as well sketched out, whatever it may be. But it's your company and it's your people, and it'll make them feel prouder, and it'll also give people a more of a window into what your company is about. Because even today, customers, I think, are also making decisions to do business with your organization based on your culture and your people, not just your product or service.
Yeah. Man, it's so true. I don't see a single um, clip art, that sort of fake stuff, it doesn't convert well. We know that statistically, and we just know from, like you said, the desk. Why do we do why do we do that?
Yeah,
It's easier, right?
it's easier. Yep.
It's easier, and it also, maybe we think it looks better than ourselves, but people, even with podcasts, right? We could have some highly edited. This whole conversation could have been 4 minutes on CNN. Hey, CNN has its place, but
Sure.
people love to learn about what's behind that. What's behind that 4 minutes? Tell me more about you. And just when you're listening to you, they get a sense of who the culture is. They want to understand the people and meet people. And yeah, I'm looking at the site. Culture is literally in your top nav.
Hmm.
That's not
Yep.
something that would happen if marketing didn't own,
Yep.
recruiting. May not happen if it's not their, priority, or it may not be as sexy, may not be as out there. And I see you have your core values, it looks like, on here too. Do the right thing, bring your A game, be a winner, have fun. We share that, some of those same culture values. So, and it's there, it's just right out in front.
Yep.
Boom, here it is. There's a video, and there's a video with clips of three or four or five real people.
Yep.
They're all smiling. Hey, and it's so real, right? It's like the
Yep.
age of authenticity versus, companies that are, I hear a lot about that too. A lot of companies are the bigger ones are using more and more realistic photos, and some of the smaller companies, though, they keep using these sort of bigger clip arts. Did you? Yeah, it seems like a disconnect, because you've talked about, like, you pointed the bat and said, we're going to this billion, let's act like it, but it didn't mean, hey, let's act like it and put fake billion photos on there.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, when we first started, we probably had a few. I'm trying to think back,
No
a few
problem. I'm
stock
not gonna.
images in
Yeah,
the early
it's like
days,
a decade
but
ago.
yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think you mentioned authenticity, and if we're going to throw in a fourth myth here, right? The
Yeah,
third being kind of like, own that cultural brand, and recruiting, all of those things should be a marketing top of mind, either activity or part of the organization. To me, that fourth one is authenticity. I think people can see more and more, people either have the instincts now or can kind of see through this after years of being bombarded with trying to sell you something that's not real or is disappointing. Is you break people's trust. Whether you're a good organization or not, people are skeptical and you have trust issues. And so when you find an organization that's authentic and are who they are, and again, we're not perfect. I mean, we've
right.
made
Oh, totally.
mistakes, and you own them, right?
Yeah,
Whatever it may be over the years. But if more often than not you have good, and that's, you mentioned our core values, we have a core value, which is do the right thing. If at the end
yeah,
of the day all our intentions are right and we can be authentic in who we are, I 100% believe that has been a differentiator for us,
man.
and it becomes part of your marketing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And when you even think about the recruiting, and this is all kind of connected. The recruiting side is very much, you're attracting. That's what marketing does all day. So it's such a mistake in my mind, hearing you talk about these things, to not have marketing at least collaborate on that stuff, if not own it,
Yep.
because we're gathering leads and accounts for sales all day long. Why can't we do the same thing for the team and for the managers, and help on the recruiting side? And I love that we're not just taking that away from HR and saying, no, you go in this box. We want them to focus
Yep.
internally with the things that no other department can even come close to touching: benefits and healthcare, and all the support services to really enrich the team.
Yep. No, that's exactly right.
Man, a lot's going right. What keeps you up at night? What are there some
Ooh.
challenges? You've really got this thing figured out.
Well,
It's like a
yeah. I
master
mean, it,
class.
it sounds that way. But like all of us, yeah, it's how do you keep your mind? Probably, yeah. My biggest challenge is how do you stop your mind from
Sure.
running, right? I think for the things that probably keep me up at night are how do you, particularly for organizations, marketing organizations that are growing, how do you balance being in multiple countries, in multiple segments within countries, and selling multiple products? And so, for example, we recently kind of established an office and a presence in Germany. And again, you're talking a very different language now and a very different culture, obviously, than even the UK, let alone the US. And so
Right.
you kind of, for me, I've kind of got to think in different stages. So nCino in the US is a very well-known brand, right? And so it's how do you maintain that market leadership position in the US? Whereas in Germany, we're relatively new. Now we have obviously a nice story to tell as a global company, but we're still relatively new and, if you will, somewhat unproven in that market. And so it's a slightly different mindset in some of the products that we sell in the US from a technology perspective. All of them aren't yet ready for the German market. So we have some, some of our products, you have a smaller sort of portfolio, if you will, for that market. And so
Gotcha.
it's, how do you kind of, it's almost like driving 5 cars at once, all at different speeds, right, on different roads and different conditions, and trying to, maintain that while at the same time having a global brand, that you want, and global messaging you want to put out. So I think, again, it's, challenges are opportunities in disguise, right? And
Totally.
so, and like everyone, it's a great book by Andy Grove. He's one of the, I think, founders, CEOs of Intel. It's called Only the Paranoid Survive. And I'm also, that's my personality. All the things I told you that, I'm sure if you listen, you're like, wow, they know what they're doing. And I like to think we do. We have a great team and a great company. But do I still worry every day about making sure I showcase the value of marketing to our executive team, to the company, to our board of directors? So we're 1,200 people, and I still personally am involved in every employee onboarding and have a session around marketing, because that's a chance for me to continue educating new employees on the importance of marketing. So my point is that, what keeps me up is a lot of these new growth opportunities and having sort of different markets that we're entering and different products. But at the same time, I also worry about all those fundamental things, because I think anytime you stop worrying about them, that's when you lose, you lose your eye off the ball.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Fundamentals, and at the same time, I can see the complexity getting, because to your point, on one hand, you've got the global brand, but on the other hand, the brand is at different stages of maturity across different segments, but also segments now in different countries, different language, and products are all different. There's it's almost like one of those charts where you just see it like exponentially grow more complicated as you go. I mean, the rewards are there, but at the same time, it's like, wow. Now, how do you approach solving that? Is it more people? Is it different teams, structure? Do you get agile? What do you do? How do you approach that?
It's kind of all the above, right?
Yeah.
It's it is, it's a combination. One, it's accepting that there's going to be people who know things, like, if you ask me what is a great approach to the German market, I mean, again, I'll have some fundamentals from a marketing perspective, but I don't know the banking industry in Germany particularly well yet. And so you have to, I think, good marketers are able to ask questions, listen, right? And not only research, read, but talk to bankers in that market. For us, talk to maybe a salesperson or whoever we maybe have already hired in that market and pick their brain. And then from that, you determine, okay, so for example, we're going to probably work with a local agency in Germany, right? Because it's a quicker way for us to kind of get established with an organization that focuses right on that market and understands it. Now, over time, we will probably add a marketing person or two behind that. But that to me is sort of the better, I don't want to call it safer, because it can be maybe upfront a little more expensive, but is for us the smarter way to kind of enter the market and get settled in the market. So again, long answer to your question is, I think, marketers need to be curious, need to ask questions, need to listen, and often, again, be creative and thoughtful on how they kind of go about this, because there isn't one secret answer. In the US, we primarily built a team, right? A marketing team. We did it with a lot of junior. That would be the one other thing I'd mention here quickly, is that don't underestimate the power of hiring young people. Because I think having a great, healthy mix of experience with sort of very young, fresh minds who oftentimes, with whether it's digital or social media, right, are even more savvy. I think that combination can be incredibly powerful. And I think at nCino, as we've grown, again, from, when I got there, 10 employees to now over 1,000, seeing people grow with the organization is incredible. And so I think that would be the other thing I'd mention too, is, and don't just hire people who have marketing skills. I like to joke that if I had applied for my job based on my academic background for a professional marketing job when I came to nCino, if Pierre had looked at it that way, he probably wouldn't have hired me.
Right.
And, the fact that we have a saying at nCino, which is we hire for attitude and we train for skills.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people on our now 80 plus marketing team. Some people have a technology background, some have a marketing background, some have a background in English literature, right? Some have background in history. And so you have this very diverse, not only backgrounds and genders and races, but experience as well, and different stages of careers. And I think you put that together, and that's really where, to me, power comes from. So don't get hung up on just having to constantly hire, somebody who just has a specific marketing background.
Yeah, that attitude, hire for attitude, right? You get the right attitude, you can learn anything. You can you can take on all kind of projects. And your approach it reminds me of a Dan Sullivan quote, which is, who, not how. When you're trying to rack your brain and figure out how to do X, maybe it's who should be doing X in agency, eventually, new team member, whoever it might be, consultant, whatever the case is. Like the idea of let's get smart people. And to your point, the background, background is helpful. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But I love that approach of just getting people from all different places and shapes and sizes.
Yep.
So now that we know what keeps you up at night, I like to what gets you up in the morning? What's exciting you about the future? What's coming around the corner? You've got your eyes across the globe. Are there strategies or technologies in this world that we live in? What's got you excited about the changes lately?
Oh boy, that's another great question, and hopefully it comes across, because I try to, sometimes I don't want to get too excited,
Yeah, right.
because I think you're very good at always managing the excitement with having very important points. Sometimes I can get overly passionate and just start rambling, but
that works too, man. You got the hammer, just swing it.
But I think, what gets me excited, is just continuing to grow a company. We use the example of Germany. I'll even give an example of Japan. A little over a year ago, we opened an office in Tokyo, and when we launched our version of our Japanese website in Japanese, which to this day, if you ask me what it says, I don't know.
Right.
But just that moment in time to think, wow, our company has a website in Japanese. And that simple thing, that is one of the things that gets me going, is these new challenges and opportunities to tackle. Also, secondly, the sort of, again, that paranoia, if you will, to how do you maintain, what you've created. And then thirdly, the people. At the end of the day, no matter how digital, and I think in spite of the pandemic, and hopefully we're getting through it here, all of us, but the people that you surround yourself with and have the pleasure of working with, to me, still will always be one of the primary drivers. And at the end of the day, working with the people I work with launches me out of bed every morning.
Yeah, no, I love that. What I'm picking up from you is that you are taking the time in between moments of paranoia to make sure that you're appreciating the wins the team has, the $100 back from the 20, and then also the people that you're working with. And I think that's the recipe for just loving the hell of what you do. That's just powerful, man.
Absolutely.
My next question for you is who are you? How you're the head of a large marketing organization at a fastly growing company with no end in sight. Did you always know you're going to be this way? Take me back to little Jonathan days. Did you know you're going to be a marketing leader? What was it like growing up? Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Connecticut. So not too far from you, Casey.
Yeah.
And I think, look, it wasn't a sort of, I was one of those people. There's some people know my sister was going to be an artist from the day she was born.
Wow.
And she's always been an artist. And I was one of those who kind of took a meandering path. And, I think of different influences. So I grew up, my dad was a graphic designer and worked, in New York City.
Oh, wow.
So I think growing up, I was surrounded by a lot of creativity and art. And I think that has served me very well. I think, when you're in marketing, we talk about numbers and ROI, and we kind of joked about everyone thinking marketing is just make it pretty, but marketing needs to be both, right? Marketing needs to be a data-driven organization, very target market, all of those different things. But then it has to put out really good materials, because if you're very good, if you define your target market really well, but you put out crap, that's not going to work. Whereas if you create something beautiful, but you send it to the wrong people are seeing it, that's also not going to work. So you've got to do both. And so I think for me, just growing up in that environment. I remember my parents dragging me to, museums in New York City when I was
Nice.
5, 6 years old. And, the last place you want to be is in a museum on a
True.
Saturday.
True.
But, much later in life, I've grown to appreciate the influence that's had, because I think for me individually as a CMO, I think it's allowed me to, have good input. So it's allowed me to, when we do videos or design work, to be able to jump in with that team, right, and really get dirty, but at the same time pull out, right, and be able to jump into some of the analytics stuff, because then I had an academic background, right, which gets very research and analytic driven. And so I think for me, and that's also, as you're growing a marketing organization, having people who are very good in different areas, and then also understanding the people who, may not be as deep in some areas, but have more of a broader, again, that combination. For me, yeah, growing up in a very creative, artistic environment, I think played an important role that I didn't realize till a little later in life.
Such a powerful, like very understated benefit. And I think, as much as we joke, right, about making things pretty, it's not easy to make things look good, right? There, and it sounds like you can see it. Maybe we're not drawing it like your sister or your dad or the people that are on our teams, but man, when I see really good design, I appreciate the hell out of it, because I know I could never do that in a million years, but I know it makes us look so good that it's back to that, hey, $1 billion, this is where we're going. And let's make sure we look like it too.
Yep.
So I could totally see you picking that up early on, of like, this is what good design looks like.
Absolutely. 100%.
So then you go to school and you're like, let's do marketing. Did you know what marketing was? How'd you pick that? International marketing too, right?
Yeah. So I did. Yeah. Undergrad. I mean, again, I was maybe still finding myself at undergrad. So I think
Totally.
I picked marketing.
Because it was the easiest, or?
Well, I think, yeah, it's funny. I think I gravitated a little. It was probably around my junior year when I started to get, my head on a little straighter in terms of focus and just drive. And, I gravitated towards business. And I think, yeah, I found marketing, if you will, kind of had a little bit of the creativity within business, right?
Right.
Folks who sometimes go to accounting, just the numbers, right? The analytics really
God
draw
bless
them.
them, but no thanks.
Right. And you get through the accounting classes because those are very important. But yeah, so I was drawn to marketing, and then spent a couple of years at IBM after doing my undergrad, which was a great place to start my career.
Wow.
I realized I was not necessarily a corporate type, but learned a ton in a very short period of time, and then went to Babson College, familiar with Babson in the Boston area.
Yeah. Good entrepreneurial school.
Yeah, which was also a life-changing experience, because, I walked in as somebody who, it's a very international school. And when I sat down with my MBA class and you sort of introduced everyone in the class, I heard people from, South America and Europe with all this experience. And I'm thinking to myself, I worked at IBM for a couple of years. I'm in way over my head at such a good school. A funny story is, on my application, you have to, you write essays, or I did at the time. I actually drew a cartoon instead of writing an essay, because I just felt, if this is going to be my school, they will appreciate that. And that's me. And somehow it maybe that helped or it worked. But I then, Babson was a very transformative experience. And then just kind of fast forward a little bit, after Babson, I got an incredible opportunity to teach at a university in South Africa for a semester. To teach small business. And I remember that also was a very transformative experience, not only to be in a country like South Africa, which is, culturally extremely different.
But
what
was that like? Where was it at? What part of South Africa?
It was the University of Stellenbosch in Cape Town, South Africa.
Okay. Wow. What is South Africa like? What was it like teaching there?
Had
you been there before, or did you just like on a whim, you're like spinning the globe and you're like, put the finger?
Yeah, I remember, if you think about, for those, I know you've got kids, I've got kids, and anyone listening, like, I think about my parents dropping me off at Kennedy Airport or JFK in New York City for, whatever, 20-hour flight to South Africa or to Cape Town via, London Heathrow at the age of 26. I had not spent much time outside the country. And so that was just one of those things where if I thought a lot, to me, it was like, let's just do it. Let's see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it was, again, one of those very influential things on my life, not only from a culture perspective, but I remember standing the first day of class I had, and by the way, if we're running out of time, let me know.
No, we're good. We got all day.
But I remember the first day of class, I had, I think, at least three translators next to me, because you had Zulu, Afrikaans, a language called I think it was Kosa. There was where you click
Oh, there's a
vowels.
click in there.
Yeah,
Wow.
and then English, right? And so I'm standing there, 26-year-old in a completely different country, about to teach a class about small business. I remember I started out, had never really taught before. I mean, I was just, so nervous. You got jet lag, you got a lot of stuff going on. And I remember I got through the beginning. I couldn't even tell you how it started. And I remember just my style was to ask a question, right? Like, I don't want to be the person who's standing there as a teacher talking for an hour and everyone's just staring at you. I like engagement.
Right.
And, culturally, I'm not sure that was the norm necessarily for teaching there. So I asked a question 10 minutes in, and I was already like pouring sweat, nervous, translators, this class in a different country. And I asked a question, of course, it's crickets. Like, nobody answers. And
Oh no.
so what do you do, right? You've asked the question, you've put yourself out there, nobody's answered, all of these dynamics happening. And so after this like uncomfortable silence, for whatever reason, there's this woman looking at me in the front row, and she smiled. So I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to help me. But she didn't say anything. And so I stepped up to her, and I was going to kind of, I don't want to say cold call, but kind of put her on the spot because I was
Yeah.
desperate.
Pass her the
And
mic, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and everyone had name tags on, and I remember I sort of looked down at her name tag, and it was had a lot of vowels in the name, and it was very
Ooh.
long. And it was just another moment of like, oh gosh. And so I tried to pronounce her name, and just, it was horrible. And so then, everything turning red, pouring sweat, like just
Yes.
everything. And there was a second or two, and then everyone started laughing. And it was kind of that moment that kind of broke the ice. It's at that moment in time what I desperately needed. And just then from there, it was an incredible class. And long story short, I got back to the States, and wanted to become a professor. And so I went to spend some time in New Zealand, work on my PhD, and then ultimately came back to the U.S. and became a director of the Entrepreneurship Center, and taught as a professor at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, before joining nCino.
Jeez, dude, that class, I can just picture you in that place. And I don't know if you had AC or whatnot, but I'm sure you were just sweating. It's one of those change your shirt afterward moments where
Yep.
you're just like, man, especially if
Yep.
had you just flown in, or had you a couple days, or you're still on a different clock?
It was, yeah, I had planned to spend time after the semester traveling around. And so I
Yeah.
only had probably maybe 3 days. And
Oh
yeah,
gosh.
it was a lot. It was a lot.
And if did people, I guess people wouldn't ask questions then, or if they did, they would go through the translator and then that would get to you and then
Yeah,
back. Or
it was funny after. In being an American there, what was also unique. So there was a lot of interest, in the U.S.
oh
This
sure.
was back in 2003 thereabouts. So there was just a lot of, and I developed some great relationships. Some of the experiences there. Obviously sharing the classroom, but
Oh
even
yeah.
beyond that, some of the experiences I had were just extraordinary.
Yeah, it sounds like, and that really just sort of sparked your passion to get into being a professor. What was it like doing a PhD in a topic like business with things changing constantly? And I know as soon as like the book's published or the paper is printed, it's like almost instantly out of date unless you're careful about it. How did you approach that?
Yeah, it's for research, and again, I think with academic research, you're always trying to find that balance between. Oftentimes, sometimes you see academic research, it doesn't relate, right? It sounds
Mm,
very academic and not sort of not applicable in the quote unquote real world. And so,
that's definitely the complaint, right? The ivory
yeah,
tower, they call it.
right. So I very much wanted to try and do stuff that was kind of in the middle. I had some great advisors, and we did a lot of research around small businesses in New Zealand and related to small business growth in the U.S. And so yeah, it was very much a sort of entrepreneurial small business focused project.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, what was the thesis or what was
Yeah,
the paper?
it was really because New Zealand, again, if anyone gets a chance to travel there, just an incredible country with great people. And it's a small country, geographically. It's two islands, and so a lot of their businesses sometimes struggle to grow,
Mm,
without exporting, right? And so there's
right.
there's a lot of relationships either with Australia and throughout Asia. And so anytime you're talking about business growth, you're talking about capital, right? And where does that capital come from? And so a lot of my research was in that area around how to sort of help fund and capitalize small businesses to help them grow.
Interesting. Like the fact that they were remote, or just small businesses in general?
Yeah, well, particularly in New Zealand.
Particularly, right.
Yeah, because again, it's one thing to say, hey, our business is in New Hampshire or North Carolina, and we want to grow to Virginia or Maine, right? Because it's just you just drive across state lines. Whereas in New Zealand, if you want to grow, you oftentimes have to cross over to Australia or cross over to Asia, and those are distances and costs in different countries. And so, that creates some interesting dynamics.
Yeah, no, I could see the interplay between that just being really interesting to see people in one versus another. And a shout out to New Zealand. We have a couple listeners down there,
Oh,
Australia as well. So they'll probably get this a day from now or whenever this goes out. But yeah, shout out to them.
absolutely. And I should, for them, I should let them know that I'm a big, I learned to enjoy rugby down there, and I'm a big All Blacks fan, which is the New Zealand rugby team.
All Blacks. I think they're the ones that do the haka, right? They've got
It
the
is.
pretty
Yep.
intense. Yeah, those guys look. I would be like, check please. Anyone else want to take my spot? These guys look pretty angry. Man, rugby, getting into rugby, and then you came back um, and how did you meet? How did you get connected with nCino?
Yeah, interesting story. I would love teaching. I'd been at University of North Carolina, Wilmington for about 6 years. And I used to, having spent a lot of time getting degrees and teaching, I always teaching small business and marketing, just like, what you've done a great job with the podcast is you bring in experts and guest speakers, right? And so
Yeah.
I used to bring a lot of guest speakers into the class. And one of the guest speakers, ironically, was one of the founders of nCino. And so when the idea was just taking shape, he actually talked to me after one of the classes and was talking to me about the need for interns, right? And they were going to hire a CEO, which became Pierre Nadet, who's one of the founders, current CEO, and set me up to meet with Pierre, who was going to be moving from Atlanta to Wilmington, North Carolina, under the premise that I was going to talk to him about interns, which both of us thought we were going to talk about interns. And about 5 minutes into the breakfast, and for me, this is one of those sort of life-changing moments, Pierre just said to me, what would it take for you to join nCino? And, to join a company that was just getting started, when you have a very, a job you love at the university, a lifestyle you love, students you enjoy working with, the research. But for me, it was probably one of those once in a lifetime opportunities that, go for it. Right. And I looked at the people and the opportunity and what the hope and goal and vision was. And I said, I think we can do something here. And so, instead of talking interns, I ended up with changing jobs. And
What a story, man. Was that a scary time? Because I wonder about, academic world, like you leave that position, it's not easy to get the thing in the first place. Was it kind of like, I don't say not burning bridges, but like you were burning the ships, you were deciding to go in this direction, or could you have always found another professorship somewhere else?
Yeah, well,
It seems like a big deal. It's not like people, just moving from job to job where you're like, oh, let me just try this job out. Like you were a professor, and it's like, okay, that's a totally different change for you.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, if you've ever had those decisions in life where if you think about it too much, you might talk yourself out of it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, I did kind of tell myself, hey, what's the worst that can happen? But it was one of those things where I literally, I mean, I didn't necessarily answer Pierre right after he asked the question. But
Make
when
him
he
wait
asked
for it a little bit.
my initial instinct was yes, and whether
Wow.
that was just a combination of a lot of factors or just blind luck. But it felt right in terms of, for me, the opportunity. And I thought, worst case, I can always go back to academia. But I also thought to myself, if, what I learned in the nCino experience, good or bad, whatever happens could make me a better teacher or professor. And so I think that was there for me. And, but here we are, maybe someday I'll go back to academia, but I found that in many ways, marketing, you're teaching the market, right? About your product, about your company. And so I absolutely love what I do. And 9 years later.
Yeah, it's amazing. And maybe you could just tell me briefly about that rapid growth. And now that I think about your story pointing at that billion, maybe mentally you were, you were ready for it, or maybe not, but like, what was it like going from the 10 people around a picnic table to 1,200 or more publicly traded,
Yeah.
international, global, multiple geographies? What is that like?
It's a lot, and to do it in 9 years, yeah,
Yeah.
it's been incredible. It's in some ways it's almost hard to put in words because it happens so fast that it's you kind of you don't always have like the things I've worried about as we grow. Are we going to lose kind of our innovative spirit? Because sometimes when companies get big, they become more bureaucratic. So I
Totally.
would worry about that. And what if we make a mistake? What if we put something out in German that says the wrong thing? All
Right.
these things. And how do you hire 1,200 people?
Yeah.
As quickly as you need to, and how do you do that in Wilmington, North Carolina?
Yeah.
And so I think what to me has been really amazing about the journey is not only the people who I get to work with, but it it's truly just it's a group of people that came together with a bunch of different backgrounds, just like I was talking about the marketing team. I mean, it
Yeah.
happened with the company as well, with just good values, who are good people, who have a great mission, and have a good product and want to help banks. We want to make banking better for consumers, and banks want to make banking better for consumers. So if we have the technology to help them do that, and so I think it's that combination, and obviously seeing growth and success from that just fuels you more.
Yeah. What was it like for you going from when you're the sole person, and I'm sure you got support as soon as you could, but you go from being that, a lot of people even listening are in that the small company where you are it for marketing, and then eventually you get another team member, or those early times. I mean, when you're at 80, you can add people, but like early on, one, maybe a part-time person or one person, then that transition, how did you stay, and how did you grow personally to go from being what maybe is a marketing manager at a company or head of marketing to being like the CMO of a publicly traded company?
Yeah, it's funny. So you hear, I'm one of those people when you say that, I'm like, is that me? Is
Yeah,
that me
right.
talking about? You just I still just think of myself as part of just I'm a marketing guy, right? As part of the
Right.
team. I think, well, one of the first things that's funny, you mentioned, even if you are a one person team, when I was a one person team, the first thing I did when I left UNC Wilmington was I knew about 5 or 6 students,
Yeah.
and I said, all you guys are now interns. Here's this great
Nice.
opportunity. And so even if you necessarily can't build a team of a lot, having interns, I mean, it
Mm,
just anything can help, right? And interns want to learn. And so I think even from the get-go, I had a group of interns that helped me with marketing. And I remember one of them had a video camera, and that's how we did our first videos. And so, yeah, point being is that there are a lot of ways to help get support around you. And I think to your point about growth is, my role has changed a lot over the years. And now the good thing is, because I've had the fortune to grow up with the company and with marketing, is I have a great understanding of our product, the market, right, our company, but I've also had a chance to be involved in each of the different aspects. So one of my great colleagues, our vice president of marketing, Catherine, she runs our PR conferences. She runs a lot of those things, and there's nobody better. But it helps the fact that when we started those things, I had to help start those, right? I had to be the one to deal with conferences, even though it's not necessarily a area of strength for me.
sure.
But I learned a lot, and so from that, she's way better than I am, but it allows me to have great conversations with her and also offer any help and support I can, because again, I've had that experience. So I think what's changed a lot for me is going from literally doing it all to helping others do it and being involved, to now helping support, right, all the people doing it. But the one thing is that I always do want to remain involved is making sure we continue to hire great people, because I think, at the end of the day, you surround yourself with great people who are really good at what you do. And again, as we've grown, we've gotten people who specialize in areas. That's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Good things are going to happen.
Man, man, wild ride, and it is still going.
We're just getting started.
Man, man, that it's something I can't wait to just see. I just keep watching. You're like hopping on Elon Musk rocket, just keep
Well,
going.
yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, fantastic. So I want to bounce a hypothetical question off you. I may or may not have a time machine here in Nashua, New Hampshire, and I'll let you
Sure.
use it. Post COVID, come up here, we get some lobster, use a time machine, all good. Some beers at the beach, right? Yeah, that'll be the opposite. So you can use this time machine, but it's particular. It goes back in time, and you get to go back and visit yourself a couple days after your undergrad graduation, and you get to go meet Jonathan back then. And you get to talk to each other. It's not like Back to the Future where you can't interact, right? You get to actually have a little sesh, maybe crack open some beer together, which would be kind of fun. um, what kind of advice would you give yourself? What kind of things would you tell yourself, knowing all the things you've been through, the highs and the lows? What kind of advice would you impart?
Yeah. And by the way, I've heard of this time machine that you've developed.
Yes,
I'm very intrigued by it.
yes, yeah. I
Um,
designed it a few years ago.
yeah, I think it was funny. I remember I happened to run into, I mean, this is years after I graduated. I ran into some folks I went to college with, and we just chatted for a little bit. I remember one of them made the comment, they're like, "You haven't changed at all." And I thought that was, and I was like, "That's a great compliment." Like that actually made me really
It
happy to
is.
hear that. And I think if I was to go back and have that undergrad conversation, I would probably tell myself not to stress so much about what's next, right? And not put so much pressure on yourself, and try to enjoy each of the moments a little more, because it will work out. But at the same time, I think some of that uncertainty, or just, if I don't do anything, nothing's going to happen, like career wise, any of that,
Hmm.
that drove me may not have happened. So I think I'd probably, if I went back in time, honestly, Casey, I'd probably just be fascinated to see and remember what I was like back then. But I don't think I would tweak myself too much.
So no tweaks, no any advice would you give yourself? So I guess the advice is don't stress. Like it's
Yeah,
all
don't
good.
yeah, don't worry so much about 10, 15 years forward and step A to get to step B. It'll work out, but stress about it a little bit so you don't get complacent.
Right, right. It makes sense. I mean, right? Because you were just doing your thing, and then you were cultivating opportunity without even realizing, by interviewing all these CEOs and founders, and making
Yep.
school much more practical because of that gene, or that design. You were interacting with all the right people, and it lined up. So amazing.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool, man. So how's the family?
Family is great.
Yeah.
Fortunately, well, I shouldn't say fortunately, but they haven't jumped into the video feed, which is good. But they are great. Yeah.
Man, I don't that classic guy, that British guy, right? Who got knocked, for that reporter who had his
Yep.
kid crawl in there, and the wife like secretly crawled in. That It's funny nowadays. I don't think that would be that popular. I mean, people wouldn't really. Everyone would understand it now
Yeah,
because
that
we're
was
all
like
at
the first
home.
one.
We're all,
Yeah, that was like the first one that just set the tone for all the ones that came after it. Yeah.
yeah, poor guy. If that had happened a couple years later, nobody would have cared. Like, oh yeah, that happened to me yesterday.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
But hey, your son, almost brand new, right? Just past a year.
Yep, year and a half.
You've just come out of that fog, which is that first year where you're
You're just
not
trying
sure
to
if you're
survive.
sleeping,
Yep,
but it's
yep,
fun.
yep.
So are things settling down, or are you enjoying it?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, again, it's I'm sure like any parent, it's stressful, right? Trying to juggle and balance it all, particularly as we've had the pandemic. But I think if anything, for me, having a year and a half year old, it reminds you of what it's like to just see the world as sort of this just brand new. I mean, the simplest things, a berry. So our son, like every morning he gets up and he starts talking about, he wants to go outside and pick berries off the tree. And
Nice.
it's I now get super excited about it too. But like who gets excited to go out and like literally pick 10 berries off a tree and like hold
True.
them?
What kind of berries too? Because I'd be like, these like the good kind or the bad
Yeah,
kind?
no, well, I haven't done all the sort of like tracing on them, but yeah, I'm pretty sure they're not like we got through the don't eat them stage, so that's good.
Okay, good.
But they're red, they're very bright red, which is probably bad, and then there's some very dark colored ones, probably also bad. But yeah, I think again, it's just I think it's obviously stressful with often with kids, but the joy of sort of seeing somebody that young developing and just being around for that, and then it,
Yeah.
it makes you feel younger too. Like I mean he's into trucks, and like I've never been more excited about a plastic truck in my life. So when he gets new toys, I'm equally excited, and it's awesome.
Oh yeah. No, it's crazy. And it's almost like like a fine wine. They just get better every age they add. There's a new element to them, and the numbers keep changing, and then eventually, everyone tells you, oh, they grow up fast. Really, there's something about the fact that everyone tells us that, right? Like, I don't know if
Right.
you've gotten that too, where they're like, they grow up
Yeah.
fast, enjoy the time. And mine are now 8 and 9, and so we have different now I'm fighting them in Minecraft. We're playing connected games together, and I taught my daughter how to print the other day on a computer, and just like these kind of fun, or share a Google Doc for the first time.
Yep.
Her first spreadsheet. I mean, that's all kind of nerdy stuff, but right, soccer and but it's just all those little things where you're like,
Yeah.
wow, they don't know this, and I live with this.
Yeah. Do they know their dad is famous and has his own podcast
Well,
and
I don't know about the famous part, but we have Apple TV and we have YouTube, and so this show goes on YouTube. So every now and then, if I'm scrolling through YouTube to see what I want to watch, my own show comes up, and they're like, "Oh my God, Dad, you're on YouTube!" So it's pretty funny, and they kind of spot the show theme, so they can kind of pick it out. So now I just got to teaching her, I need you to go and view each one of these shows at least for 30 seconds, because Dad needs the views, and don't forget to give it a thumbs up too, so I can like farm that out to the kids.
right. Yeah, I
I'm
like it.
tempted. I'll pay a penny per. That's probably some violation of some terms, so I probably should stop talking. But yeah, it's just fun seeing what they know, and what they observe too. They're like
Mhm.
sponges, right? I don't know if you've had something like this happen. Yeah, maybe you're not 1.5, but we were saying something at the dinner table, and then I knocked on the table, like knock on wood kind of thing. So I just was like, oh yeah, knock on wood. And my daughter looked at me and she's like, what was that? Explain, why did you knock on the table? I'm like, oh, there's this thing and it's kind of fun.
Yep.
But they pick up everything.
Yeah, no, we've hit the stage where you can no longer have conversations. Like even though he's only got 10 words, like I'm blanking on examples, but we've realized like he's understanding what we're saying. So you can't always talk in front of him, or you have to spell out words.
Spell it out,
So he
right?
doesn't. So we're at that stage. Yeah.
You're like, hey, did you get the DOG?
Right.
No, I didn't. And eventually they learn how to spell, and then you just got to text, because you're like, oh, you heard that? You understood? Okay, well, we got
Yeah.
to shift plans here.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, hey, where are some of the places people can reach out and contact you? What social platforms are you on? Where do you want people to reach out?
So yeah, love to. Happy to have people reach out. I mean, mainly so nCino, obviously nCino.com. nCino has a Twitter account, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all those places. If you're interested in learning more about nCino, but for me, probably LinkedIn's probably the best. I've found, I've kind of, I don't want to say email is just, I email, you sort of get overloaded. Whereas LinkedIn, I like LinkedIn a lot because you can see people's profile. And so you get an idea of
Me
who's
too.
reaching out, right? And you can have
Yeah.
some interactions through the messaging feature. So yeah, if people are interested in reaching out or contacting me, LinkedIn is probably definitely my favorite and preferred, and
It's awesome.
pretty easy to
Yeah.
find me. Yeah.
We'll put links in the show notes. People just click right on through over to that. That'll be awesome. But this has been great, man. This is awesome. Part 1, right? Part 2 is on the beach with beers.
I like it. Well, Casey, and maybe you should share the story about a special time you spent down here at Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina.
I'm a big fan of Wrightsville Beach. Yeah, back before I got married, it was my girlfriend, then fiance, now wife. We spent a little weekend there, and it was like Liberty from the Marine Corps. I had like a weekend off, whatever they call 48-hour pass, and I had a chance to. Man, Wrightsville is just awesome down there. It's a special place for sure.
Yeah, it is a great place. So yeah, I agree. So with your listener support, I think we should get you down here and we can do part 2 on the
Right?
beach.
It's like I need a Patreon account. Like, get Casey to Wilmington, right? Oh man, this has been great. But thank you again for coming on here and sharing this. There's so much knowledge. Like I was literally taking notes. I have like front and back 2 pages of notes over here, and I'm sure everyone else does too. But thank you again.
True pleasure. I've super passion for marketing and big, as I said, big fan of the show, Casey, and everything you do. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Much appreciated, man. Much appreciated. It's an honor that you would be listening to the show as well. And now you're on it. So now you got to listen to your own episode at least, for sure.
Ooh, yeah, we'll see.
It's a good one. For those people listening, hey, we're out of here. This has been the Hardcore Marketing Show. We will catch you all next time.